"Choose your woman," the sheriff said. But the stranger stunned the whole town when he growled back, "Give me all 3 fat sisters." The crowd roared with laughter, jeering in the dusty street. Church bells rang overhead. Jail keys clinked. At the sheriff's belt, and 3 trembling women stood humiliated before the town. No man had ever spoken for them, not like this. He wasn't looking for laughter. He was looking for something else, something no one in this town expected. But what began as mercy soon sparked a fire. A burned-down barn, a stolen spring, a sickness that threatened to take the only light in their new home. And as the cattle baron's men thundered in on horseback, rifles ready, came one man's choice: to stand with 3 outcast sisters, break the grip of power, and turn mockery into a miracle? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty town square as the Given sisters huddled. Together, their thin shawls offering little protection against the biting spring chill. Ava, the eldest, stood straight back despite her trembling hands. Martha's lips moved in silent prayer while Ruthie, the youngest, fought back tears that threatened to spill down her round cheeks. Sheriff Mayfield's boots clicked against the wooden planks of the town hall steps. His badge gleamed as he adjusted, his vest savoring the crowd's attention. As per territorial law, these women's fathers' debts must be settled. He paused, dark eyes scanning the gathered faces. Any man willing to take one as wife can clear a portion of what's owed. Snickers rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, lifted her fan to hide her smirk as she whispered to her companion. The general store owner's son elbowed his friend, both grinning at Ava's broad shoulders and Martha's plain face. The creak of wagon wheels drew attention to the edge of the square. Jack Boone guided his team to a stop, his expression unchanging. As he took in the scene, years of mountain living had weathered his face, but his eyes remained sharp beneath the brim of his hat. A week's worth of beard couldn't hide the firm set of his jaw. "Well, if it ain't the mountain man himself," Sheriff Mayfield called out, voice dripping with false welcome. "Come to town for supplies, Boone. Might as well get yourself a wife while you're here." He gestured to the sisters with a flourish. "Take your pick." The crowd's laughter grew louder. Someone called out, "Better hurry, for the good one's taken," though none of the onlookers stepped forward to make an offer. Ava's cheeks burned red as she stared at the ground. Martha's prayers grew more urgent, her fingers working the worn cross hanging at her neck. Ruthie pressed closer to her sisters, shoulders hunched against the mockery. Jack Boone dismounted slowly, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached the steps. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but firm enough to carry across the square. "Give me all 3. The laughter died so suddenly it left a ringing silence in its wake. Sheriff Mayfield's smirk faltered. "What's that?" "You heard me." Jack's words carried the weight of mountain winters and lonely trails. "I'll take responsibility for all 3 sisters." The shock lasted only moments before fresh laughter erupted, harder than before. "3 wives?" someone shouted. "Man's been in the mountains too long. Now see here, Boone." Sheriff Mayfield recovered his composure, though his eyes had narrowed. "You can't possibly. I've got a homestead that needs tending." Jack cut him off. "Got food stored, roof that don't leak, and work that needs doing." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. "This cover what's owed?" The sisters exchanged uncertain glances. Ava's eyes darted between Jack and the sheriff, searching for the trap. Martha's prayers had ceased, but her fingers still, worried at her cross. Ruthie watched Jack's face, looking for any sign of cruel humor there, and finding none. Sheriff Mayfield counted the coins twice, his expression souring. "Well, he covers half what they owe. It's all I got," Jack said simply. But I give you my word. I'll house them proper, feed them fair, and see no harm comes to them." He looked directly at the sisters then, his voice softening just slightly. "If they're willing." The crowd had grown restless, disappointed that their morning's entertainment had taken an unexpected turn. The sisters huddled closer, sharing silent looks of desperate calculation. Better a stranger's mercy than certain ruin, Ava's tight nod seemed to say. Martha's answering glance held fear but also faith. Ruthie's small hand squeezed her sister's arms in agreement. "Fine." Sheriff Mayfield spat the word. "Take them. But I'll be checking that you keep your word, Boone." Jack helped the sisters into his wagon, ignoring the renewed jeers from the crowd. "Reckon he'll keep them all in that cave of his," someone called out. "Probably eat them come winter," another added, setting off fresh waves of laughter. The sisters settled on the hard wooden bench, drawing their shawls tight. Ava sat rigidly, eyes forward, while Martha whispered comforting words to Ruthie. Jack climbed up and took the reins, his broad shoulders blocking some of the town's view of his new charges. Without a word, he flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving behind the sneering faces and cruel laughter. The sisters cast wary glances at each other as the town receded behind them, each wondering if they'd traded one form of humiliation for another, yet clinging to the desperate hope that this silent mountain man's unexpected mercy might prove genuine. The wagon wheels creaked and bounced over the rutted dirt road, each jolt making the sisters sway on the hard wooden bench. Their carpetbags, threadbare and patched, sat clutched tightly in their laps like shields. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs but doing little to thaw the chill of uncertainty that gripped them. Jack cleared his throat, his deep voice startling after the long silence. "Your pa, he was the leather worker, wasn't he? Down by Miller's Creek?" Ava's spine stiffened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the distant hills. Martha's fingers tightened around her bag's handles. Only Ruthie glanced sideways at their rescuer or captor. They weren't yet sure which. "Heard tell your ma used to lead the singing at church gatherings." Jack tried again, his tone careful and measured. Folks said her voice could lift the roof beams. The mention of their mother brought fresh pain to their faces. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves and the rattle of the wagon's wooden frame. When the sun reached its peak, Jack guided the horse off the main trail toward a creek that splashed and gurgled over smooth stones. The horse's flanks were dark with sweat from the climb. "Need to let him drink," Jack explained, bringing the wagon to a halt in a patch of shade. "Might want to stretch your legs some." The sisters watched as he unhitched the horse and led it to water. After a moment's hesitation, they climbed down stiffly, their skirts dusty from the journey. Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Not much," he said, offering them each a biscuit, "but it'll keep you going till supper." Ruthie accepted hers with trembling fingers. "Thank you kindly," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the creek's burble. Jack's weathered face softened slightly at her words. He nodded and moved away to give them space, checking the horse's hooves and adjusting the harness. The landscape changed as they continued their journey upward. Scattered cedars gave way to thick stands of pine. The air grew cooler and carried the sharp scent of evergreen. Shadows lengthened across the trail as evening approached, and finally they crested a rise that revealed their destination. The cabin squatted against the mountainside, its log walls weathered gray by sun and storm. A barn listed slightly to one side, its door hanging crooked on leather hinges. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney, telling of a banked fire within. Jack drew the wagon to a stop. "It ain't much to look at," he admitted, "but the roof don't leak, and the walls keep out the wind." He paused, looking at each sister in turn. "You'll be safe here. Got my word on that." Inside, The cabin smelled of wood smoke and the sharp tang of drying venison. Jack lit a brass lantern, its warm glow revealing a simple room with rough-hewn furniture. A table and chairs occupied one corner, a cast-iron cookstove the other. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a collection of well-maintained tools lined one wall. "Set yourselves down," Jack said, gesturing to the table. "I'll get some stew going." The sisters perched on the wooden chairs, their carpetbags still in their laps, watching as Jack moved about the cabin with practiced efficiency. He added wood to the stove, set a pot to heat, and began chopping vegetables with quick, sure strokes. The meal passed in near silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the cookstove. When the last spoonful was finished, Ava set down her spoon and fixed Jack with a steady gaze. "Mr. Boone," she said, her voice firm despite its softness, "we need to be clear about something. What you paid today, it wasn't for wives. You brought home women with dignity, or you brought home nothing at all." Jack met her gaze across the table, his expression serious. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "That's truth," he agreed quietly. "And you have my word on that, too." The agreement, unspoken but understood, settled over the cabin like a blanket. As night drew its curtain across the mountains, the sisters spread their quilts on the plank floor, the familiar patterns offering some comfort in this strange place. Jack withdrew to his rope bed in the corner, leaving the lantern burning low. The truce was uneasy, built on necessity and desperate hope, but it was a beginning. As the sisters lay close together under their quilts, the cabin's warmth wrapped around them, promising if not safety, then at least shelter from the mockery they'd left behind. Morning sunlight streamed through the gaps between the cabin's logs, painting golden stripes across the plank floor. Jack rose quietly, careful not to wake the sisters still huddled under their quilts. The familiar rhythm of his morning chores beckoned, splitting wood, checking livestock, fetching water. The thud of his axe soon echoed across the mountainside. Inside, the sisters stirred at the steady chopping sound. Ava smoothed her skirt and twisted her hair into a neat bun while Martha kindled the cookstove. Ruthie, always drawn to anything involving food, investigated the stores in Jack's crude pantry. "Not much here," she whispered, surveying the sacks of cornmeal and dried beans. "But I reckon I can make something special." Her fingers traced the rough edges of a cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall. The sisters worked together with practiced ease. While Ava hauled fresh water from the pump, Martha swept the floor with a warm broom. Ruthie mixed cornmeal with the last precious eggs and a splash of milk, humming softly as she worked. The sizzle and sweet aroma of frying cakes drew Jack back inside. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, watching as Ruthie expertly flipped the golden rounds in the skillet. His usually empty table now held a steaming plate of perfectly browned cakes, their edges crispy and centers tender. "Ain't had nothing like this since." Jack stopped, then simply nodded his thanks as he sat down. The meal loosened their tongues. Martha passed the honey jar, asking about the best spots for a kitchen garden. Ava's sharp eyes had already noted the cabin's needs: patches for the roof, repairs for the barn door, supplies to lay in before winter's grip took hold. "Might be room for root vegetables," Martha mused, glancing out the window at the sloping ground. "Turnips and carrots store well, and they're hardy enough for the mountain weather." Jack led them outside after breakfast, boots crunching on frost-crisp grass. The barn's weathered boards leaned like a tired old man, but inside the structure remained sound. A few chickens scratched in the dusty corners, and a milk cow lowed softly in her stall. The small corral beyond held his horse and a half-broken colt. Ava pulled a stub of pencil from her pocket, already making calculations. "We'll need more feed before snow flies," she said. and that roof won't last another winter without fresh shingles. Jack watched them move through his homestead, noting how they saw not just problems but solutions. These weren't helpless city women, but capable hands who understood the demands of survival. "There's something else you should see," he said, leading them up a gentle slope behind the cabin. A spring bubbled from between moss-covered rocks, its water crystal clear and cold enough to make teeth ache. "This here's the lifeblood of the place. Waters the stock, feeds the garden, keeps us alive when summer burns hot." Ava's face tightened at the mention of the spring. "Pa spoke of papers," she said slowly. "Water rights, deeds to the spring." Sighed. They were important. That evening, while Martha mended a tear in Jack's work shirt by lamplight, she spoke softly about the truth they'd been avoiding. Sheriff Mayfield had been pressing Pa about those papers for months. Said the debts weren't just about money, they were tied to this spring somehow. Jack's frown deepened as understanding dawned. The sheriff's eagerness to auction off the sisters, his mocking smile when Jack stepped forward. It hadn't been just about humiliating 3 helpless women. The spring represented power in this dry country, and Mayfield wanted control of it. Supper. That night was a quiet affair, each lost in their own thoughts about what might come. The cabin felt smaller somehow, as if the weight of unseen threats pressed against its walls. But then Ruthie's voice rose softly in the dimness, a hymn their mother had loved, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. The simple melody filled the cabin's corners, pushing back the shadows. Jack sat very still, remembering how long it had been since music had touched these walls. The sisters' voices joined together, harmonizing as naturally as breathing, and for a moment, the lonely mountain didn't feel quite so solitary anymore. The hymn faded into silence, but its warmth lingered, like the last rays of sunset holding back the night. Outside, an owl called across the darkening valley, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Inside the cabin, the small family by circumstance settled into their places for sleep, each wondering what tomorrow might bring. 2 days passed like water over stones, each hour bringing new rhythms to the mountain homestead. On the morning of the 3rd day, Jack hitched his bay horse to the wagon while the sisters gathered their meager funds. The wheel hubs creaked as they set out, the morning sun warming their backs as they descended toward town. Ava sat straight back beside Jack on the wagon seat, her shoulders tense. Martha and Ruthie huddled in the back, sharing worried glances as the first buildings of town came into view. Main Street stretched before them like a gauntlet they had to run. The wagon's wooden wheels clattered on the hard-packed dirt. Outside the saloon, men paused their card games to leer. Women on the boardwalk drew their children closer, whispering behind raised hands. A group of ranch hands nudged each other, making loud comments about Boone's harem. Jack kept his eyes forward, his jaw set firm as granite. He guided the wagon to the hitching post outside the mercantile, helping each sister down with careful courtesy. Inside, the store owner's wife watched them with narrowed eyes as Jack selected supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and a handful of nails for repairs. "Need thread, too," Ava said softly, examining a spool's quality. Her fingers worked. The cotton strand, testing its strength, thought the bell above the door jangled. Sheriff Mayfield's boots thumped across the wooden floor, his badge catching the light. "Wow, if it ain't the mountain man and his collection." His voice dripped with false sweetness. 3 mouths to feed now, Boone. 1 back doing all the work." He leaned against the counter, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Won't be long before debt drowns you." Jack's shoulders tensed, but he continued counting out coins for their purchases. Mayfield wasn't finished. "Course, Baron Thornton's been asking about that spring of yours. Pure mountain water's worth more than gold these days." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Might be he'll make a claim on it soon enough." Jack's hand tightened on the counter edge. but he kept his voice steady. "Much obliged for your concern, Sheriff. We'll manage just fine." Gathering their supplies, they left the mercantile. The sisters huddled closer as they walked toward the church, hoping to find kindness there at least. The whitewashed building stood quiet in the afternoon sun, its steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way home. Preacher Collins emerged from the side door, his lined face brightening at their approach. "Jack Boone," he called out warmly, "and the Given sisters." But something in his manner shifted as he drew closer, his welcome cooling like shade on a hot day. His eyes darted to the street, noting who might be watching this exchange. Ava stepped forward, her voice clear in the churchyard. "Are we welcome here, preacher? Or are we less in God's eyes because others mock us?" The preacher's face flushed. He studied his boots, then raised his head to meet her steady gaze. "The Lord's house turns none away," he said softly, properly chastened. "You're welcome any Sunday." Loading the supplies took little time. As they started home, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. They passed the McClintock farm, where the family working their fields paused to stare. Some faces showed curiosity, others barely concealed scorn. A few, mostly women who knew hard times themselves, offered slight nods of acknowledgment that evening, settled around the cabin as they unloaded the wagon. Inside, Jack stirred the stew pot hanging over the fire, the familiar scent of beans and salt pork filling the warm air. Wind rattled the shutters, carrying the promise of rain. "There's something needs saying," Jack spoke into the quiet. He ladled stew into tin bowls, passing them around. "If the Baron claims that spring, we can't survive up here. No water means no crops, no cattle, no life. Life." Ava set her bowl down firmly. "Then we fight for what's rightfully ours. Pause papers prove the water rights belong to us. We just need to claim the deed proper." Thunder growled in the distance as Jack nodded slowly. "I'll ride to the county clerk tomorrow, see what can be done legal-like." He spooned more stew into Ruthie's outstretched bowl. "Won't let them drive us off easy." They ate in companionable silence while the storm drew closer. Lightning flashed through the window gaps, and rain began to drum on the roof. The shutters shook harder, as if nature itself shared their unease about the days ahead. Martha stirred the fire, adding another log. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making their small circle of warmth seem both precious and fragile. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside they had stew, shelter, and each other for now. Dawn crept over the mountains in shades of pewter, the previous night's storm leaving everything draped in mist. Jack stood at the cabin door, adjusting the horse's harness, while Ava gathered what they needed for the journey to the county seat. Martha and Ruthie huddled in the doorway, worry creasing their brows. "Mind the chickens," Jack reminded them, his voice gentle. "And keep the door barred after dark." Martha nodded, clutching her shawl tight. "We'll tend everything proper. Just be careful on them roads." The wagon wheels sank into mud as they set out, the horses straining against the wet earth. Jack and Ava sat side by side, sharing a rough blanket against the morning chill. Minutes stretched into hours as they navigated the treacherous path, every rut and washout slowing their progress. Near midday, Ava pulled her father's Bible from her carpet bag, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. She opened to a familiar passage, her voice steady despite the wagon's jolting. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Jack's hands loosened slightly on the reins, tension easing from his shoulders as her words filled the space between them. The familiar verses seemed to calm the very air around them. The county seat appeared through the mist like a painting coming into focus, a cluster of brick buildings rising above wooden storefronts. Jack helped Ava down from the wagon, conscious of the mud splashing their boots. Together they climbed the courthouse steps, pushing through heavy doors into a crowded hallway. The clerk's office buzzed with activity. Ranchers in dusty coats argued water rights, while lawyers in dark suits shuffled papers. Jack and Ava waited their turn, watching the clerk's spectacles flash in the gaslight as he examined document after document. Finally, they stepped forward. Jack placed the sisters' papers on the desk, his voice clear but respectful. "We're here about the Given Spring. These ladies have rightful claim through their father." The clerk's fingers traced yellowed pages, his frown deepening as he read. "Complex matter," he muttered. "Previous liens, disputed boundaries." He made several notes in a thick ledger. "Judge Patterson will need to review this. I can schedule a hearing next week, Wednesday morning." They left with the hearing date written on a slip of paper, hope warring with uncertainty in their hearts. The return journey stretched before them, the afternoon light already beginning to fade dawn as their wagon creaked homeward. Ava's quiet voice broke the silence. "You didn't have to do this," she said, staring at her calloused hands. "Taking on 3 womenfolk, fighting for a spring that might not even be ours." She swallowed hard. "I know what people say about me. Too plain, too sharp-tongued. Now I'm just another burden you've got to bear." Jack kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was firm. "Ain't nothing wrong with being plain-spoken when you're speaking truth. You've got a sharpness of mind that this territory needs. And dignity?" He glanced at her then. "That's something no amount of mockery can take, lest you let it." Darkness had fallen by the time they reached the cabin, lantern light spilling from its windows like a beacon. Martha and Ruthie rushed out to meet them, relief plain on their faces. "We were that worried," Ruthie exclaimed, helping Ava down. The creak's rising something fierce. Inside, Martha had kept soup warming by the fire. They ate quietly, listening to rain drum against the roof, each lost in thoughts of the coming hearing. The familiar sounds of spoons against bowls and the pop of burning wood filled the cabin. Before they retired for the night, Ruthie knelt by her quilts, hands clasped. Her prayer rose clear and sweet in the lamplight. "Dear Lord," she began, "we ask your mercy over this spring that gives life to our land, and bless this household you've brought together. Help us be worthy of your grace." Jack stood in the shadows, hat in hand, humbled by her simple faith. The rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof, but inside the cabin, something stronger than storm winds was taking root. Trust, born of shared purpose and growing understanding. Martha banked the fire while Ava laid out quilts. The days. Johnny had worn paths both physical and spiritual, marking the beginning of their legal battle and cementing bonds that ran deeper than mere necessity. The week before the hearing stretched out like a length of well-worn rope, each day measured, in tasks that needed doing. Morning frost gave way to autumn sunshine as Jack and the sisters fell into a rhythm of shared work. Their breaths clouding the crisp air dot up on the barn's weathered roof. Jack hammered while Ava passed shingles. Martha and Ruthie worked below, sorting through vegetables from their late planting. The steady thunk of Jack's hammer echoed across the valley, mixing with the sisters' voices as they discussed where to plant the hardy cabbages they'd gotten from the mercantile. "Reckon these'll take root before the real cold sets in," Martha said, marking out rows with twine. Her hands moved sure and steady, knowing the earth's ways. Ruthie wiped her brow, looking up at Jack and Ava on the roof. "That patch job should hold through winter," she called. "At least long enough to keep the hay dry." Throughout the day, riders passed on the road below. Some neighbors pulled their horses up short, pointing and whispering with sneers plain on their faces. Others, like old Tom Wilson and his wife, offered respectful nods. Tom even touched his hat brim to the sisters, a gesture that brought color to their cheeks. Inside the cabin, Ruthie worked magic with their simple stores. The scent of fresh bread filled every corner, and her beef stew, seasoned with wild herbs, she'd gathered, made the place smell like the home it was becoming. Even Jack found himself lingering at the table, savoring every bite. "Don't believe I've eaten this well since my mama's table," he admitted one evening, sopping up gravy with a chunk of warm bread. When Sunday evening came, Jack hitched the wagon to take them to the church gathering. Ruthie smoothed her best dress, worn but clean, while Martha and Ava pinned up their hair. Jack waited by the horses, his own shirt scrubbed and collar starched. The church windows glowed against the deepening dusk as they arrived. Whispers followed them up the wooden steps, but Jack kept his head high, ushering the sisters inside with gentle dignity. They found seats near the back, aware of the sideways glances and muttered comments as the service began. Familiar hymns filled the whitewashed walls. Then came Amazing Grace, and Ruthie's voice rose clear as a mountain stream. The congregation fell silent, turned to look. Her rich tones carried the old words up to the rafters, speaking of grace and redemption with such conviction that even the most hardened scoffers seemed touched. "Was blind, but now I see," she sang, and in that moment, something shifted in the church. Other voices joined hers, harmony replacing discord, if only for a verse or two. After the final Amen, Preacher Roberts made his way to them, his lined face warm with approval. "Miss Ruthie," he said, "the Lord surely blessed you with a gift. We'd be honored to have you join our choir." The other congregants lingered, some offering shy smiles or quick words of greeting. The mockery that had followed them in had softened to something closer to acceptance. The ride home was quiet but peaceful, their lanterns swinging gentle light across the rutted road. Martha broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe God can bend hearts yet," she mused, watching the stars emerge above the pines. Jack's smile, though faint, reached his eyes. "Reckon he works in his own time," he replied softly. Back at the cabin, they shared a late supper of leftover bread and preserves. Jack found himself paying attention to small details he'd never noticed before. The way Ruthie's laugh brightened the room, how Martha's prayers brought peace to their meals, the quiet strength in Ava's hands as she poured tea. Their conversation flowed easier now, stories and hopes mixing with the practical talk of tomorrow's work. The bond between them all was growing stronger, though none could say exactly what shape it would take. It was more than necessity, more than convenience. Something warm and real that made the cabin feel truly lived in. As the sisters prepared for bed, spreading their quilts in their usual spots, Jack stoked the fire one last time. Outside, the mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring them one day closer to the hearing, that shadow that hung over them like storm clouds gathering above the peaks. But tonight, the cabin was warm with lamplight and lingering laughter. And for now, that was enough. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the mountain valley as Jack hitched the wagon for their journey to the county seat. The sisters emerged from the cabin wearing their best dresses, faces set with determination despite their obvious nervousness. Ava clutched a leather folder containing their father's papers, her knuckles white against the worn surface. "Ready?" Jack asked softly, helping each sister onto the wagon bench. "As we'll ever be," Ava replied, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. They set out just as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, the wagon wheels crunching over frosted ground. Behind them, a stream of riders and wagons began forming, townsfolk eager to witness what promised to be quite a show. Jack kept his eyes forward, though he could hear the murmur of voices trailing them like autumn leaves in the wind. The courthouse stood proud in the county seat, its red brick walls rising 2 stories above the dusty street. Jack helped the sisters down from the wagon, noting how Ava straightened her spine despite her fear. Martha squeezed Ruthie's hand as they climbed the worn steps, their boots echoing in the morning quiet. Inside the courtroom, polished wooden benches filled quickly with spectators. The cattle baron's lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, sat at the front table shuffling papers with confident motions. Sheriff Mayfield leaned against the back wall, his badge catching the light from tall windows. When the judge entered, everyone rose. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen their share of range disputes. The proceedings began with the baron's lawyer rising to speak, his voice smooth as creek stones. "Your Honor, the Givens family's debts clearly supersede any claim to water rights. The original deed was surrendered as collateral years ago. Baron, Thornton simply seeks what is legally his." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Jack watched Ava's shoulders tense. Then, before the judge could respond, she stood. Her voice quavered at first, but grew stronger with each word. "Your Honor, if I may." She opened the leather folder with careful movements. "I have here the original deed, signed by my father and witnessed properly. It shows the spring rights were never surrendered, only promised as future collateral in a separate agreement that was never finalized." The courtroom fell silent as Ava walked forward, presenting the papers. The judge took them, adjusting his spectacles as he studied each page with careful attention. Minutes stretched like hours while he read, the only sound the soft rustle of paper and the nervous shifting of feet. Finally, the judge looked up. "These documents appear to be in order. The deed remains valid, with the spring rights clearly tied to the Givens family land." He raised his voice over the growing murmur. "I hereby grant temporary title to the Givens sisters, pending further review of all claims within 30 days. Gasps filled the room. Tears sprang to Martha's eyes, while Ruthie clutched her hand. Ava stood frozen until Jack stepped forward, gripping her shoulder with quiet pride. The baron's lawyer gathered his papers with sharp movements, his face dark with barely contained fury. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight did little to warm the chill that settled over the crowd. Sheriff Mayfield pushed away from his horse, stepping into their path as they headed for their wagon. "Paper won't stop fire of guns," he snarled, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Best remember that." Townsfolk gathered in clusters, their murmuring carrying threats barely veiled. Jack guided the sisters through the crowd, one hand near his belt, his eyes watching every movement around them. They climbed into the wagon quickly, and Jack snapped the reins, eager to put distance between them and the growing tension. The ride home was quiet, pride mingling with dread as dusk painted the mountains purple. When they finally reached the cabin, Ruthie went straight to cooking, while Martha set the table with their best dishes, saved for special occasions. Supper that night was joyous despite their underlying worry. Ruthie had outdone herself with fresh bread and a chicken stew that filled the cabin with savory warmth. They ate heartily, celebrating their victory with second helpings and shared smiles. But as the meal wound down, Jack's expression grew serious. "We must prepare," he said, setting down his spoon. "The Baron won't yield quietly. He's not a man to accept defeat, even a temporary one." Martha looked up from her bowl, her faith steady in her eyes. "The Lord will carry us through," she insisted. "He's brought us this far." Ruthie began humming softly as she cleared the dishes, an old hymn about standing firm in troubled times. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls as embers glowed orange in the hearth. Their peace felt as delicate as morning frost, but for now, it was enough to sustain them. 3 days after their court victory, Jack woke to the acrid smell of smoke. His eyes snapped open in the darkness, and he threw off his blanket, heart pounding. Through the cabin window, an orange glow painted the night sky like a terrible sunrise. "The barn!" he shouted, voice rough with sleep. Fire! The sisters jolted awake as Jack yanked on his boots. Ava and Martha quickly followed, while Ruthie grabbed empty buckets by the door. They burst out of the cabin into the cold night air, and the sight stopped them cold. Flames roared through the barn's wooden frame, consuming the hay stored for winter. The fire reached toward the stars with hungry fingers, casting wild shadows across the yard. Inside, terrified animals bellowed and screamed. The horses. Jack sprinted toward the barn doors, throwing them open. Heat blasted his face as smoke poured out. He could barely see through the thick haze, but he heard the panicked whinnying of their two workhorses. Ava appeared at his side, wrapping her shawl across her face. Together, they plunged into the inferno, reaching the horse stalls. The animals reared and bucked as Jack and Ava worked to free them. Finally, they led them out into the night air, their flanks steaming in the cold. The bucket line, Martha called from the well. She and Ruthie had already started, passing water from hand to hand. For hours they fought the blaze, their arms aching as they hauled bucket after bucket. Sweat mixed with soot on their faces, and smoke burned their eyes and throats. But the fire was too fierce, too hungry. It devoured the hay, the grain, and half their livestock before they could save them. As dawn broke over the mountains, they finally collapsed in exhaustion. The barn was nothing but a blackened skeleton, still smoking against the pale morning sky. The air hung heavy with ash and the sickly sweet smell of burned wood. Ruthie's coughs broke the silence, violent spasms that shook her entire body. She had breathed in too much smoke during their desperate fight. Her face was gray, and she struggled to catch her breath between coughing fits. "Ruthie!" Jack rushed to her side as she swayed on her feet. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms. She felt too light, too fragile as he carried her toward the cabin. Behind him, Ava and Martha clung to each other, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on their faces as they surveyed the destruction. Throughout the morning, neighbors rode past on the distant road. Some slowed to look, but none approached. Jack understood their fear. Crossing the cattle barren meant risking the same fate. Still, their absence cut deep. Inside the cabin, Ava tended to Ruthie, who lay pale and weak in her bed. She pressed cool, damp claws to Ruthie's forehead and helped her sip water between coughs. Martha knelt beside the bed, her lips moving in constant prayer, her rosary beads clicking softly through trembling fingers. Jack sat outside on the cabin steps, staring at the ruined barn. Their court victory now felt like ashes in his mouth. Most of their winter supplies had burned. Feed for the animals, preserved food, tools, and tack. The loss of livestock would hit them hard. And Ruthie, his chest tightened at the thought of her labor breathing. When evening came, they gathered around the table for a meager supper of cornbread and beans, all they could manage from what remained. The meal passed in heavy silence, broken only by Ruthie's weak coughing. The cheerful warmth that usually filled their suppers had burned away with the barn as night deepened. Jack sat beside Ruthie's bed, watching her fight for each breath. Her face looked ghostly in the lantern. Light, but her eyes still held that spark of gentle strength he had come to admire. "Don't give up, Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're a family now." Jack's throat tightened as he took her small hand in his rough one. When he tried to speak, his voice broke. All he could do was squeeze her hand gently, letting his touch say what his words could not, that he would protect them, somehow, no matter what came next. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, a coyote's lonely howl echoed through the darkness, as if mourning their loss. Martha's prayers continued soft and steady, while Ava moved quietly around the cabin, trying to salvage what hope she could from their meager remaining supplies. Morning. Sunlight crept across the homestead, revealing the full extent of their loss. Jack stood in the barn's ruins, his boots crunching on ash-covered ground. Charred timbers jutted like broken bones against the sky. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air, mixed with a worse scent, that of the animals they couldn't save. His heart sank as he picked through the wreckage. Their tools lay twisted and melted, worthless now. Feed sacks had burst, spilling scorched grain that mixed with the ash. In the corner, he found the bodies of 3 sheep and their spring calf, overcome by smoke before they could escape. Each discovery felt like another weight pressing down on his shoulders. Ava appeared. Beside him, her face drawn with worry. "Ruthie's fever's rising. She needs medicine, Jack." He nodded grimly, already heading for the stable where their remaining horse waited. Within minutes, he was mounted and riding toward town, prayer and determination warring in his heart. The town seemed unusually quiet when he arrived, folks hurrying inside at his approach. The apothecary's bell jangled as Jack entered, dust motes dancing in the morning light. Behind the counter, old Mr. Peterson wrung his hands, not meeting Jack's eyes. "Need medicine for fever and cough," Jack said simply. "The girl's bad sick." From the smoke, Peterson shuffled his feet. "I am sorry, Boone. Baron Thornton's men were here this morning. Made it clear anyone helping you would regret it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I got family to think about." Jack's fingers tightened on the counter until his knuckles went white. Before he could speak, a soft voice called from the shops. "Corner, come with me, Mr. Boone." Widow Sarah Morrison stood there, her gray hair neat under her bonnet. She was a tiny woman, but her eyes held steel as she gestured for Jack to follow her out the back door dot in her small garden, protected by tall fences. She quickly gathered herbs, horehound, mullein, and wild cherry bark. Her weathered hands worked swiftly, wrapping them in paper. "Steep these together," she whispered, pressing the package into his hands. "Add honey if you have it. It'll ease the cough and help break the fever." She squeezed his arm. "We're not all afraid of that man's shadow." Jack's throat tightened with gratitude. "Much obliged, ma'am. I won't forget this kindness." The ride home seemed endless, though his horse's hooves ate up the miles at a steady pace. Dusk was settling when he finally reached the cabin, purple, shadows stretching across the yard. Inside, he found Ruthie still abed, her face flushed with fever. Martha helped him brew the herbs in their last clean pot, the medicinal smell filling the cabin. Ava supported Ruthie's head as Jack helped her sip the warm liquid. "There now," he murmured, his rough hand gentle on her brow. "This'll help you heal." Through the night, Jack kept his vigil beside her bed. Every labored breath seemed to echo in the quiet cabin. Ava moved purposefully in the background, taking stock of their supplies and scratching figures in her father's old ledger. "We can stretch the flour another week," she said finally. "The vegetable patch wasn't touched by the fire. If we're careful." With portions, her voice trailed off, but her eyes held determination. Martha sat down beside Jack, her Bible open in her lap. "Remember what the good book says," she said softly. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We must hold to faith." Jack nodded, though his heart felt heavy. Outside, a storm was building, wind rattling the cabin shutters. The sound seemed to match the turmoil in their hearts. Fear for Ruthie, worry for their future, anger at the injustice of it all. In the flickering lamplight, Jack watched Ruthie's shallow breathing. Her face, usually so bright with laughter, looked drawn and pale. Each wheezing cough tore at his soul. He had promised to protect these women, to give them a safe home. Now everything they'd built together teetered on the edge of ruin, but watching Ava's quiet strength as she planned, their survival, seeing Martha's unwavering faith as she prayed, Jack felt something stern and resolute grow in his heart. He reached out and took Ruthie's small hand in his. "I won't let you be cast aside," he whispered, too soft for the others to hear. "Any of you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The storm outside grew stronger, rain now joining the winds. Assault on their little cabin. But inside, despite their fears and losses, 4 hearts beat as one family, clinging to hope in the darkness. 2 days passed, the mountain air still carrying traces of smoke from the burned barn. Word of the fire had spread through the valley like wind through prairie grass. In town, faces grew troubled as folks whispered about the Baron's methods. Even those who'd sneered at the sisters now shifted uneasily when Thornton's men rode past. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool. Jack helped Ruthie into the wagon, wrapping her in quilts against the chill. Her face remained pale, but determination brightened her eyes. Martha and Ava sat beside her, their best shawls carefully mended. The church bell rang across the valley. As they approached, its deep tones drawing people from every direction. Inside the whitewashed building, sunlight streamed through simple windows. The sisters settled into a back pew, aware of the glances cast their way. Sheriff Mayfield sat near the front, his badge gleaming. The congregation grew quiet as Preacher Davis approached the pulpit, his Bible warm but well-loved in his hands. Preacher's voice filled the space, strong and clear. "Today, we speak of mercy." His eyes swept across the gathered faces. "For what profit is there in an empire of cattle if it's built on cruelty? What worth is wealth that comes from burning? A family shelter?" Gasps rippled through the church. Sheriff Mayfield's face darkened like storm clouds. The preacher continued, his voice rising with conviction. "A home built on mercy is holier than any empire of cattle. When we allow fear to silence our conscience, we betray the very teachings of Christ." His fist struck the pulpit. "How can we sing hymns of love while ignoring the smoke of our neighbor's burning barn?" The sheriff stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. All eyes followed as he stormed toward the door, boots striking hard against the planks. The heavy door slammed behind him, but the preacher never paused. "The time has come to choose. Will we bow to power or stand for what's right? Will we let fear rule our hearts or show the compassion our Lord commands?" Ruthie's eyes filled with tears as she gripped her sister's hands. Ava sat straighter, her chin lifted proudly. Martha's lips moved in silent prayer. Jack felt something shift in the air, like the moment before spring rain breaks a drought. That evening, as shadows lengthened across their yard, the first neighbor came. Without a word, Mrs. Anderson left a basket of fresh bread on their stoop and hurried away. Then came the Wilsons with dried beans and a stack of blankets. Throughout the evening, more appeared. Quick, quiet visits leaving what they could spare. Inside the cabin, Jack gathered their unexpected bounty with trembling hands. "The Lord provides," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. Martha arranged the gifts on their small table, while Ava heated water for tea. Ruthie sat wrapped in quilts by the fire, sipping the broth Jack had made from Widow Morrison's herbs. Though still weak, her smile brightened the room. "See?" she whispered. "God hasn't forgotten us." The lantern cast warm light across their faces as they shared their evening meal. Fresh bread and bean soup filled their bowls, simple food made, precious by the kindness behind it. Even Ruthie managed a few careful spoonfuls, color finally returning to her cheeks. Quiet laughter filled the cabin as Martha told stories of their childhood, of happier days before their father's troubles began. Ava's quick wit drew chuckles from Jack, surprising them all. The warmth of fellowship pushed back the shadows of recent days. Jack watched them from his place by the fire, Ava's capable hands mending a blanket, Martha's peaceful expression as she read her Bible, Ruthie's gentle humming as she drifted toward sleep. Something had changed in him, as surely as winter yields to spring. The solitary mountain man who'd once needed nothing but his own company was gone. In his place stood a man with a household, a family, worth any sacrifice to defend. He thought of his cabin as it had been quiet, orderly, and utterly lonely. Now it held laughter and hymns, the scent of bread, and the warmth of shared purpose. These women had brought life to his empty rooms, strength to his solitary days. Their courage in the face of mockery and violence had taught him the true power lay not in empire, but in mercy. The lantern flame danced, casting gentle shadows as night settled over their mountain home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had bread and hope, blankets and fellowship. Most precious of all, they had each other. Jack bowed his head, thanking God for softened hearts and the mysterious ways he turned cruel intentions. Toward good dot, 3 days after the preacher's bold sermon, hoofbeats thundered up the mountain path. Jack looked up from mending fence posts to see Sheriff Mayfield leading 6 armed men toward the cabin. Their rifles glinted in the afternoon sun. A clear threat against the peaceful homestead dot inside. Ava heard the riders first. "Martha, stay with Ruthie," she whispered, moving to the window. Her heart pounded as she counted the weapons. The sheriff reined his horse to a stop, dust settling around the mounted men. "Boone!" he bellowed. "Time's up. The Baron wants his. Spring, and we're here to take it." Jack set down his tools and walked steadily toward the cabin's front door. His movements were deliberate, hands empty and visible. The door creaked open behind him as Ava stepped out, then Martha. Even Ruthie, wrapped in her shawl and pale from her illness, joined them on the porch. "This spring's deeded to the Givens. Sisters," Jack said firmly. "Court's already ruled on it." Mayfield's laugh was harsh. "Court rulings don't mean much up here in the mountains, Boone. You ought to know that by now." He shifted in his saddle, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Step aside. Let us do what needs doing." The sisters clasped hands, their soft prayers carrying on the mountain air. Jack stood his ground, though his heart hammered against his ribs. 1 man against 6 armed riders. The odds weren't good. "No," Jack said simply. The sheriff's face darkened. "Boys," he barked, "show them what happens to—" "Hold right there, Mayfield." The new voice rang out clear and strong. Coming up the path was Thomas Anderson, the dairy farmer, shotgun across his saddle. Behind him rode more townspeople, the Cooper brothers from the Mercantile, old Jim Wilson and his sons, even Preacher Davis himself. They formed a line between the sheriff's men and Jack's cabin. "This has gone far enough," declared Wilson, his gray beard bristling. "No more burning barns. No more bullying decent folks off their land." The sheriff's men shifted uneasily, looking at the growing crowd of townspeople. What had started as an easy show of force had turned into something else. "Entirely. You're all making a mistake," Mayfield snarled. "The Baron won't forget this." "Maybe it's time the Baron remembered he's not above God's law," Preacher Davis said quietly. "Or man's law either." More riders appeared. Farmers, shopkeepers, ranchers with small spreads. Each face held the same resolve. The sheriff counted. Heads, his expression growing darker as he realized his men were now badly outnumbered. "This isn't over," he spat, yanking his horse around. "You'll regret crossing the Baron." His men followed as he galloped away, dust billowing in their wake dot as the thunder of hooves faded. Tears streaked down Ruthie's cheeks. Martha held her sister close while Ava gripped the porch rail, her knees weak with relief. Jack stared at their neighbors, throat tight with gratitude. "Thank you," he managed finally. "All of you." "It's what neighbors do," Thomas Anderson said simply. "Should have done it sooner." The crowd began to disperse, each offering words of support as they left. By sunset, only the household remained, gathered around their table for evening meals. The stew pot bubbled with vegetables and meat donated by caring neighbors. Carrots from the Wilsons, beef from the Andersons, potatoes from the Cooper brothers. Ruthie sat wrapped in quilts near the fire, her voice soft but steady as she hummed an old hymn. Martha gently stroked her sister's hair, adding her own voice to the melody. The familiar notes filled the cabin with peace. Jack looked around at these women who had changed his life so completely. "I need to say something," he began roughly. "What you did today, standing there with me against those guns, that took real courage. I'm grateful, more than I can say." Ava met his gaze across the table, her eyes bright with emotion. "We stand because you stood for us first," she said firmly. "When everyone else saw 3 burdens to mock, you saw 3 women worth defending. That's not something we'll ever forget." Outside, crickets began their evening song, a gentle chorus rising from the grass. The spring burbled steadily, its water flowing free and clear. Through the cabin's windows, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The peace felt fragile, new, but it was growing stronger with each passing day. Like seeds taking root in freshly turned soil. They finished their meal together, the warmth of fellowship pushing back the memory of the afternoon's confrontation. Their household had faced its trial and emerged stronger, supported by neighbors who had finally chosen to stand for what was right. The first frost of winter traced delicate patterns across the cabin windows, nature's own lace curtains catching the pale morning light. Inside, Ruthie stood at the wooden table, her hands deep in bread dough. Though still thin from her illness, color had returned to her cheeks, and the familiar sound of her humming filled the warm kitchen. Outside, the sharp rap of hammers echoed. Across the homestead, Thomas Anderson and his sons were helping Jack raise new barn walls, the fresh-cut pine boards standing straight against the cold blue sky. Other neighbors had come too, bringing tools and willing hands to the work. "Careful with that beam there," Thomas called out, steadying a heavy timber. "That'll need to hold through many a winter storm." Jack nodded, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. The past weeks had humbled him deeply. Where once he had stood alone, now he worked shoulder to shoulder with men who had become true neighbors. The new barn was rising faster than he could have managed by himself, sturdier too. Martha emerged from the chicken coop, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. The Cooper sisters had brought over a dozen hens last week, clucking and healthy. "God provides," Martha had whispered then, tears in her eyes at their neighbor's kindness. "Soup's nearly ready," Ava called from the doorway. She had been keeping careful count of their stores, stretching what they had while accepting the community's gifts with quiet gratitude. Sacks of flour, jars of preserves, smoked meat. Each donation helped ensure they would survive the coming winter. The men paused their work, gathering around the outdoor fire where Ava had set up the big soup pot. Steam rose in the crisp air as she ladled out bowls of thick bean soup. Jack watched his neighbors talking easily with the sisters, any trace of their former mockery long gone. As evening approached, the workers headed home, leaving behind a barn that was nearly complete. Jack stood looking at the new structure, remembering the charred ruins it had replaced. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. Inside the cabin, lantern light cast a warm glow as they gathered for supper. Ruthie's fresh bread filled the air with its homey scent. She served it proudly, her hands steady now where they had once trembled with weakness. "The Lord has blessed us," Martha said softly, breaking her bread. "Look how far we've come from those dark days." Ava set down her spoon, her expression thoughtful. In the lamplight, her eyes met Jack's across the table. "Jack," she said gently, "I need to ask you something." She paused, gathering her courage. "Do you regret binding yourself to us? Taking on 3 women and all our troubles?" The cabin grew quiet. Even Ruthie's habitual humming stilled as they waited for his answer. Jack looked at each of them in turn. Martha's gentle face, Ruthie's hopeful eyes, Ava's steady gaze. His throat tightened with emotion. "No," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible." His rough hands spread on the table, encompassing their small household. "Before you came, I had a cabin, but not a home. I had land, but not a family." Martha smiled, reaching over to pat his hand. "Family isn't chosen by laughter alone," she said wisely, "but by burdens shared." Her words rang with truth, drawing nods from her sisters. Ruthie's clear laugh suddenly broke the solemnity of the moment. "Well, if we're family now, you'll have to learn all my favorite hymns. Jack Boone, no more of this silent brooding at Sunday service." Their laughter rose together, filling the cabin with joy. It was the first real laughter they had shared in weeks, sweet and healing as medicine. They lingered over their meal, trading stories and gentle teasing, the warmth between them having nothing to do with the crackling fire. Later, Jack stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold night air fill his lungs. Stars glittered overhead, diamond bright in the winter sky. He could hear the sisters inside. Ruthie's voice lifted in song while Martha and Ava washed the supper dishes. Standing there, Jack realized something profound had changed within him. The deep loneliness that had been his constant companion through years of solitary mountain life was gone. In its place was something richer, the certainty of belonging, of having people who depended on him and whom he could depend upon in return. The night wind whispered through the new barn's rafters, carrying the promise of snow, but Jack felt no fear of the coming winter. Their stores were solid, their shelter secure, and most importantly, they would face whatever challenges arose together. His days of facing life alone had ended the moment he had spoken up in that town hall, though he hadn't known it then. He smiled up at the star-filled sky, grateful beyond words for the family he had found in these three remarkable sisters. Snow drifted down in lazy flakes, coating the mountain homestead in pristine white. Inside the snug cabin, warmth from the crackling fire cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls as Christmas drew near. Jack had been secretly working on his gifts for weeks, carefully setting aside a portion of his trading money to buy special items from the general store. On Christmas Eve, after supper, Jack cleared his throat nervously. "I have something for each of you." He retrieved 3 small packages wrapped in brown paper and string. The sisters exchanged surprised glances as Jack handed them their gifts. Ava unwrapped hers first, revealing a fine wooden comb with delicate carvings. Her fingers trembled as she traced the pattern. "It's beautiful," she whispered, blinking back tears. Martha gasped as she opened her package to find a leather-bound hymn book, its gold-edged pages pristine. "Oh, Jack," she breathed, clutching it to her chest. "Now we can have proper worship." At home, Ruthie's eyes sparkled as she unfolded several yards of cheerful calico fabric. "For new aprons," Jack explained gruffly, "since yours got singed in the fire." "We have something for you too," Ruthie said, as Martha disappeared into their sleeping area. She returned carrying a carefully folded quilt, which the sisters presented together. Jack spread it out, amazed at the intricate pattern. "We made it from pieces of our old dresses," Ava explained. "Each square holds memories." "This was from Mama's favorite Sunday dress," Martha pointed to a faded blue patch. "And this flowered piece was from the dress Ruthie wore when she won the church singing competition." Jack wrapped the quilt around his shoulders, throat tight with emotion. The sisters gathered close to the fire, sharing memories of their mother. Her steadfast faith, her gentle hands, the way she taught them to face hardship with grace. "Remember how she always said God's timing was perfect?" Ruthie asked softly. "We're not burdens, Jack. We're blessings." Her voice carried the same sweet Conviction their mothers had held. Ava reached for Jack's hand. God planted us here, together, she added firmly, like seeds in good soil. Jack squeezed her hand, voice rough with feeling. I vow to honor you always, he promised. You've made this place a true home. They shared a simple supper, but it felt like a feast. Ruthie's voice lifted in Christmas hymns, Martha's alto joining in harmony. Even Ava hummed along as they celebrated their first Christmas together. The music filled the cabin rafters, joy echoing off the walls that had once known only silence. Outside, snow continued to fall, wrapping their homestead in a peaceful blanket of white. But inside, the warmth of family chosen and cherished glowed, brighter than any hearth fire. Spring arrived with gentle warmth, melting snow into trickling streams that fed the mountain soil. The homestead stirred with renewed vigor as green shoots pushed through dark earth in neat rows where the sisters had planted seeds. The rebuilt barn stood proud against the blue sky, its fresh timber gleaming in the morning sun. Inside, cattle lowed softly and chickens scratched contentedly in their pen. Through the cabin's open windows drifted Ruthie's clear voice, lifted in song as she kneaded bread at the worn table. Her cheeks glowed with returned health, no trace remaining of the smoke that had nearly silenced her forever. The scent of baking bread filled the air, mingling with spring's fresh promise. Jack watched from the doorway, his heart full. These past months had transformed his solitary existence into something rich with purpose. He cleared his throat. Sisters? Would you join me by the spring? The three women followed him to where clear water bubbled from the earth, the spring that had first brought them together through struggle and near defeat. Now it sparkled in the afternoon light, a symbol of their perseverance. Jack knelt in, the soft grass before them, his weathered hands clasped. I'm not offering marriage in the way folks might expect, he began, voice rough with emotion. But I want to pledge myself to you proper-like, to keep you safe, honored, and cherished, as my family for all my days. Tears spilled down Ava's cheeks as she reached for his hands. Martha's prayer of thanksgiving mixed with Ruthie's joyful sob as they embraced him, forming a circle of belonging that needed no conventional bonds to hold it fast as evening approached. Wagons and riders appeared along the mountain track. Townsfolk arrived bearing dishes and lanterns, gathering to celebrate the family's survival and triumph. Tables were arranged in the yard, groaning under the weight of shared bounty. Lantern light cast a warm glow over faces that had once sneered, but now smiled in welcome. The preacher offered grace, his words acknowledging the power of mercy to transform hearts. Ruthie's voice led the hymns that rose into the darkening sky, joined by dozens of others until the mountain air rang with praise. Jack stood quietly at the head of the long table, taking in the scene before him. Children darted between adults. Legs, neighbors passed platters with easy laughter, and his sisters, his family moved among their guests with graceful hospitality. His chest tightened as he remembered that day in town when mockery had nearly drowned his choice in shame. I chose mercy, he murmured, mostly to himself, and God gave me a family. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.